We saw Prime Minister Modi visiting Russia recently.
India under Narendra Modi has received a lot of accolades from Western countries. Great progress, Mars mission, Moon, etc. The commentary still would largely be that India needs to build toilets.
Ambani wedding. Do you think this is an important aspect of soft power?
Perceptions can't be shaped with hard power alone.
Why is that the case, ma'am?
Real politics is something which has no morals. Every country behaves in its own national interest. Unfortunately, if ever there's a choice between India and China, Russia would choose China.
And what do you think about that?
India calls itself Vishwamitra, or the world's friend. If it's not helped any other country, why would it help a country like India?
I want to hear your perspective on the current Israel-Palestine issue.
The military industrial complex of the West has been feeding the war. People are minting money by, selling arms and weaponry, etc. So it works for them.
All these conflicts around the world, is it ever going to end?
In an increasingly interconnected world, the geopolitical landscape is shifting faster than ever. Nations are redefining alliances, emerging powers are challenging established norms, and conflicts, both old and new, are reshaping our understanding of global security. The stakes have never been higher, and understanding these dynamics is crucial, not just for policymakers, but for every one of us who lives in this global village. To help us navigate these complex issues, we are joined today by Dr. Shiparna Pathak, a distinguished scholar and an expert on India's foreign policy and China. With her deep insights, we'll explore how India is positioning itself on the global stage, the rise of China, and the subtle yet powerful role of soft power in international relations. We'll also dive into her co-authored book, Drifts and Dynamics, which offers a profound analysis of the Russia-Ukraine conflict and its ripple effects across Northeast Asia. If you want to stay informed about the forces shaping our world, this is the conversation you can't afford to miss. So whether you are tuning in from your morning commute or winding down in the evening, get ready for an enlightening discussion that will leave you with a deeper understanding of the world we live in.
Before we start today's conversation, I've got one request. If you ever enjoyed the videos or found any value out of it, please subscribe to it. It really helps us as a channel to improve our content and bring better guests. Thank you again and enjoy the rest of the video. Let's start with a very generic question that I'm going to throw at you about what is India's position in geopolitics at the moment? How does the world perceive us?
So India's stature in the last, largely 10 to 12 years has definitely grown. As our economic growth rates perform better and better, our stature also grows. But that being said, again, if I were to divide the world into largely two camps, one led by the US, the West, and the other by China, there is still a lot of distrust of China, of India. Why from the US? Because historically, US never really has been on India's side, because even though the US claims to be, the world's oldest modern democracy and so on, and preaches all sorts of values of democracy, immediately after India's independence, which was the world's largest democracy and still is the world's largest democracy, the US chose to support Pakistan. Historically, it's always been on Pakistan's side. So right now, even now it supports Pakistan in a lot of different ways. Just the way it has been very suspicious of China's rise, there is also a fear that, one day India's rise will be very unsettling for the West, because we don't form alliances with the West. Because, see, alliance is a very Western concept. I would form an alliance with you only when I'm weaker than you and I need your protection. India talks more about friendship or partnership, which is more on equal terms. That is something which the West would not be willing to give us, because it doesn't want to part with the superiority that it envisages for itself. That's the West. And then comes China, with which we have had multiple conflicts, and it will always continue. The conflict that we are in right now, it's not a one-off incident. We've had the late 1950s, 1962, 67, 87, Doklam, Galwan, Yangtze Valley, and so on. So this is not really going to end. So clearly, there are these two camps which would not want India's rise to happen very easily, or would create certain hurdles. That being said, well, yes, in the last 10 years, if you would have seen, India under Narendra Modi has received a lot of accolades from Western countries. At least 12 countries, 12 foreign countries have given the highest sorts of respect to Prime Minister Modi and so on. So our stature is definitely increasing. what we did at the G20, getting the African Union in, behaving like, a friend of the global south, as an integral part of the global south, that has been noticed. But how is India really viewed by people across the world? That's another very difficult question, because mostly it's very Orientalist sorts of views against India and India's land of snakes and snake charmers. Even when India would make great progress, Mars mission, moon, etc., the commentary still would largely be that India needs to build toilets, just forgetting the fact that it has already done quite a lot. It's made great strides in science and tech and so on. So this is going to continue. India needs to keep its goal in sight and keep moving ahead. Another country which is again very important for India's foreign policy is Russia. Historically, USSR has helped India. At a time when both China and the US were siding with Pakistan during Bangladesh's war of liberation, the USSR, at just one call of India, one SOS call from India, helped India. There are things which cannot be forgotten. Realpolitik is something which has no morals. Every country behaves in its own national interest. So I'm not saying that the USSR or Russia did anything because they love India or India is its true best friend. It also operated from lenses of realpolitik and did that.
True.
That being said, we've not had those sorts of moral hectoring which the US constantly gives to India about democracy, about human rights and so on, without having an iota of knowledge as to how democracy works outside the Anglo-Saxon world. That Russia hasn't done to us. Russia, fortunately for us, hasn't interfered in our domestic politics. Russia hasn't, claimed our sovereignty like China has. And there's a very good image of India or of currently of Prime Minister Modi. So it's difficult to say if it's 100% good for India or 100% bad. We are somewhere in the middle, and we just need to keep carrying out our own actions for our own goals.
I would like to add a perspective to this conversation that you said that we are perceived as the land of snakes and charmers. But do you think the recent Ambani wedding changed a lot of perception of India, since there's a lot of international stars who were invited, and they were showcased. They were shown a side of India which is the real India at the moment as well. And do you think this is an important aspect of soft power? Because there's two types of power. Obviously, there's a hard power, the military, economy, diplomacy, etc., and there's soft power. Things like this, things like our billionaires, our yoga, our Ayurveda for that matter. Do you think soft power plays an important role as well?
Soft power definitely does play a very important role, because perceptions can't be shaped with hard power alone. I'll be deflecting from the whole Ambani wedding for a bit, but just to give you an example as to how soft power works, right? Why do you think China keeps constantly talking about the Confucius culture or the greatness of the Chinese language or calligraphy, etc.? It's trying to showcase that its language and culture are much better. And this is a push for soft power. Or it constantly talks about people-to-people contacts and so on, right? This is definitely a push for soft power. Or why do you think the US Embassy all of a sudden decides to do, podcasts or programs with YouTubers and try to teach Indians about how democracy works, And these are all soft power. They want to project their version of democracy and so on. Soft power is important for shaping perceptions and for also showcasing one's power. As far as that is concerned, this particular wedding did a great job. While there is huge inequality in India, there are many poverty-stricken, but we also do have some of the richest people in the world. So, this helps in countering some of the Orientalist views which do exist about India and Indians. So, it did work well for that. But then on the other hand, there are these forces which will constantly want to showcase India as being a land of snakes and snake charmers. So, which is why even after this wedding, there was this constant hankering about how there's inequality and how this is a wastage of money and so on, completely disregarding the fact that people can get married as per their own wishes and they can spend their own money in whichever ways that they want to. So this has been a good enough showcasing of the fact that, well, we have huge discrepancies in wealth, as is the case in most parts of the world. And we are not just a land of snakes and snake charmers.
So this was an important point. That's why I had to add to it. Another point I want to add to it is that you spoke about relationship with Vladimir Putin, and Russia-India relations. We saw Prime Minister Modi visiting Russia recently. How did that impact China, for that matter? Because China is considers himself in a stronghold with Russia also.
So China and Russia have this, friendship with no limits, and it was signed, unfortunately, in the year of when Russia-Ukraine war began. Many of our scholars and journalists said that this particular visit was to try and wean Russia away from China. Russia currently is heavily dependent on China because Russia has its own war going on and so on. Unfortunately, if ever there's a choice between India and China, Russia would choose China because China is supporting them with a lot of arsenals, etc., in its whole war in Europe, the Russia-Ukraine war, which India is not. Why are we not doing it? Because we have our own versions of security and stability of the international system, or war and peace. This whole meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Putin, it was, of course, not viewed. I'll first come to the US. It wasn't liked by the US at all. In fact, Ambassador Eric Garcetti even said that the relationship must not be taken for granted, and it's like a marriage. Unfortunately, what he forgot was that there's been a constant hectoring from the US. Even if this is a marriage, for India, it seems like a marriage of convenience from the part of the US. That when you need us against the Chinese, you utilize us. When he gave these these sorts of hectoring and the sorts of statements, it seemed like maybe he has this very parochial, patriarchal view of a marriage in his head, in which a white, Firang husband is dominating a traditionally dominated, subordinated Indian wife, right? So that's how it seemed. What India does with its partners is no one's business. India doesn't complain when Biden hugs Xi Jinping, which he did last year, or when the US meets Pakistan and so on. India doesn't create these narratives. India doesn't give this hectoring, because it is the sovereign right of every country to decide and determine what is best for its own national interests. We are not fueling Russia's Ukraine war. This has been proven multiple times. In fact, Antony Blinken himself said yesterday that there is no evidence of a deepening of a defense cooperation between India and Russia. So it's not of concern. Fair enough, you said that. But why did you have to first make the statement then, right? So for us, it seems like a marriage of convenience, right? So which is why we cannot trust the US completely. Coming to China, China started portraying this whole thing as, China and Russia are friends, India and Russia are friends, trying to create an image and deepen the wedge between India and the US further, that, India, Russia and China are in one corner. India and Russia might be friends. China and Russia might be friends. But India and China are not friends. Because friends do not intrude into their friends' homes and sit there illegally, besides doing a lot of other things. So India and China are not really friends. China was, as opposed to the West, which came up with so many clamorings about, they are concerned about the visit, etc. China seemed more confident, because they know that, heavens forbid, if ever there's a choice between India and China, Russia would choose them because they're dependent on them, right? So they seem more calm and confident. So that's how the two perceptions from the two quarters of the world were.
Since you spoke about Russia, let's talk about Russia-Ukraine war as well, which has been ongoing for the last 2.5 years. Do you think this war is ever going to end? This is the question first I must ask you before we go deeper. Is it ever going to end?
Look, it was assumed that it's going to be a quick victory. That's what it was assumed. And no one, Putin, of course, didn't think that it's going to get dragged on this way, right? It's become a protracted sort of conflict, but the hopes were quite the opposite. It's not really happened. Would this really ever end? Look, the military-industrial complex of the West has been feeding the war, while a lot of countries try to take this very high moral posturing as to how they are concerned about Ukraine, etc. Fact is, who's fighting the war? It's the Ukrainian forces. No one's put their boots on the ground. People are minting money by, selling arms and weaponry, etc. So it works for them if the war really goes on. I'm not saying it doesn't work for Russia. For Russia also it works,
sure.
Right? There is a certain possibility, though, that if Trump comes to power, as it seems right now, because Biden has just pulled out of the race, this probably should have been done earlier if these were the mullings. It's going to be difficult for Kamala Harris, even if, the Democrats do vote for her as a candidate. It's going to be difficult for her to, win the elections, etc. So If Trump does come to power, things might be a bit different. I think I was reading somewhere yesterday from some Western scholars themselves that Zelensky is actually now contemplating actually discussing with Russia, and maybe put out a peace proposal. Because now the fears are real that Donald Trump is going to come to power. Maybe if he does come to power, there'll be a change, if not a complete stop in the war. A complete stop and reverting back to the normal is, of course, very difficult. But there'll be a change in this whole nature of the war. It won't be the way in which it is right now.
I see this war more in terms of the West versus Russia than Ukraine versus Russia, because if you think about it, but again, Russia is doing really well. Even after 16,000 sanctions that the West imposed in Russia, they are doing, the economy is prospering because they are doing business with the global South. Having said that, you spoke about Donald Trump coming in power. What does the dynamic change then now after that? Because do you think he's going to push to end the war?
So, see, one of the first things about whole Donald Trump's campaign, the first and the biggest thing about his campaign is MAGA, Make America Great Again. Now, how to make America great again? He's going to try and protect, Americans' jobs and the American industry and so on. So he's going to continue being the same sorts of policies which the Biden administration had vis-a-vis China, those are going to continue. Also, the trade conflict between China and the US started under Donald Trump, when so many tariffs were. So that sort of a posturing is going to continue, of course. He's going to be more inward looking, which is why his focus on, the other theaters of conflict, be it Russia, Ukraine, or a possible scenario of China engaging in a full-blown attack of Taiwan, Israel, Gaza, the sort of focus is going to be reduced, or what the Quad is doing. This is going to get reduced drastically under Donald Trump. So the situation might be a bit more, world peace situation might be a bit more volatile. But that being said, during Donald Trump's time, Russia, Ukraine hadn't happened. Israel, Gaza hadn't happened. So that's also one more point to consider, that under the Democrats, under the Biden, all of these conflicts unfurled, and there are two ways of looking at it, of course. And if Donald Trump comes to power, he is going to continue being very antagonistic towards China, as he was in the last term, as was Biden during this current term. But yes, China will get a free hand probably in the South China Sea, in the Taiwan Straits, because Trump has clearly said that I'm not going to interfere in the Taiwan Straits crisis. So that will just embolden China further. So there's good and bad to Donald Trump coming to power.
On the subject of Russia-Ukraine, you wrote a book called Drifts and Dynamics, which you had written and edited as soon as the conflict unfolded, but you connected it to the Northeast Asia. Do you want to talk about this a little, ma'am?
Yes, thank you so much. So this was the first book, I think, which was published not just in India, but across the world. The purpose was to track the initial responses of the countries of China, Japan, South Korea, North Korea, and Taiwan to this whole escalation from Russia against Ukraine. And what were the responses? The idea was that if we can document the initial responses from these 5 countries, we can maybe later on, maybe once the war has ended, juxtapose with their positions then, if there's been any sort of change in the responses. As of now, we see a huge change in China's response, at least, because initially China was trying to showcase that it's against the war and it was playing neutral. But as the years have unfolded and as the conflict has dragged on, it is very clear that China is supplying lethal weapons, as the UK has said, to Russia. China has been very openly supporting this sort of military exercise in Ukraine. China has been doing everything to support Vladimir Putin. So that has become very clear. But initially, they tried to show that they were neutral, the way India is neutral. We don't vote for or against at the level of the UN. We have voted against Russia in 2 cases at least. China has voted for Russia in those cases. The posturing has changed, at least for China. The other countries, well, South Korea was very wary of the conflict. It hadn't made those statements. Now it's very wary of the whole nexus between Russia and North Korea, because North Korea has also apparently supplied arms to Russia. So South Korea is worried and they've come up with statements. Japan, I think just last month, they said that they were very angered by Vladimir Putin's statement that a post-war peace plan cannot be discussed because of Japan's involvement. And Japan took offense to that. So Japan has been anti-Russia since the beginning, but now these things are happening. So Japan is becoming more and more vocal. Taiwan is, it's a US ally. So of course it's against Russia. It has its own fears about China emulating a similar sort of thing in the Taiwan Straits crisis. And it has been also tacitly taking anti-Russia posturing. So, these three countries, largely their whole posturings are still the same with minor differences. China's is a huge sea change. North Korea has become more supportive of Russia over the years. Initially, the support was not very vocal, but now it's very, even last year they've said that we support Russia. So that's what this whole book was about.
Right. At the end of the day, ma'am, I've seen in geopolitics, the dynamics change only if it benefits and safeguards their own interest. And that's what the book shows as well. And if you must, I would really ask you to, read this book and understand the perspectives of these Northeast Asian countries and their support in the Russia-Ukraine war.
Thank you so much, Shivam.
Thank you, ma'am. So we now coming back to India and speaking about India's biggest threat, that is China. Our last confrontation with China was during Galwan, 2020. It's been 4 years since, and we are seeing the trade back up with China. Why is that the case, ma'am? And what do you think about that?
Immediately, after China attacked India and infiltrated violated our sovereignty, etc., there were a lot of mullings, and we cancelled a lot of even investment and projects from China into India. We came up something called the Press Note 3, which restricts Chinese investments into our sensitive sectors, etc. We did a lot of that. Even in terms of goods, which say would be available on, say, Amazon, Flipkart, etc., it was necessary that companies list a country of origin so that the consumer knows which country it is buying from. Now, see, it's impossible to restrict trade completely from China. No country has been able to do that. We also can't do that because of very logical and rational reasons. There's something called the consumer surplus. Everyone would want to buy something which is cheaper so that she can save more money in her hands. That's the case for citizens across the globe. So it's difficult to curtail cheaply manufactured products from China. But we did a lot of things so as to protect and shield ourselves. Over the years, Chinese companies have found very smart ways of bypassing the country of origin clause, for example. China is also engaging in a lot of charm offensive with regards to India. Because right now, India's last quarter growth was at 8.1%. China's is, even though they say it's at 4, Rhodium Group says it's at 1.5. It's at a pathetic low. China needs markets, and India's is the biggest market. So if you just take one segment of, say, EVs, electronic vehicles, countries across the globe, especially from the West, are refusing to get Chinese overcapacity in EVs into their own countries. So they're coming up with sanctions, etc. Also, these EVs are not of great quality to begin with. Now, what does China do with all of that? It would be great if it could get a market in India. So, which is why it's throwing all sorts of charm offensive. I just hope that we continue being on the guard. Of late, there has been a lot of news that, we are lifting certain sorts of bans on certain Chinese companies, Shine, for example. And the hope is that, they can help the Make in India initiative grow further. The fact here is that wherever there's been Chinese investments across the globe, it's never yielded in local employment or local growth. So I think there's a lesson which we need to learn from. If it's not helped any other country, why would it help a country like India with which it's in a conflict? So I think we need to be smarter. But yes, we are trying to cut the reliance that we have on China. So, for example, we signed a FTA with the EU this year. We are also in negotiations with the UK for an FTA. With the US, our trade has grown. As opposed to China, India has a positive balance of trade with the US, which means that we sell them more and buy less from them. Whereas with China, there are all sorts of hurdles and restrictions for Indian products. Even the products in which India has an advantage, be it software or IT or even agricultural products. That's not the case with the West or with the US. So we are trying to, shift that sort of a reliance away. And of course, the US also needs and the West needs a big market, which is why companies and governments from across the world are now looking at India. I think we still need to be on guard because if we are not, our Make in India will get thwarted really badly. Coming back to EVs again, We have some excellent companies like Mahindra and Mahindra, Tatas, etc., which are capable of producing EVs and we already have our own EVs. Why would we get Chinese EVs and thwart the little growth or the potential which our own homegrown companies have? So I think there's still a need to be on guard. Unfortunately, we forgive and forget very easily. This has been the case in the past, which is why we've been forgiving China completely and just being fooled by their charm offensive. China is doing it all over again. I sincerely hope we don't fall prey to their charm offensive.
There's some issues with in Arunachal as well. We were discussing before our conversation today. Do you want to add anything on that?
In Tibet in particular, China has been setting up these 5G base stations. We've tried and countered them well by our Vibrant Villages program, etc. If you read the election manifesto of the ruling party also before Modi 3.0 happened, there is a huge emphasis on strengthening our defenses and continuing investments on the border. I hope specific examples such as this of the 5G base stations, these are taken cognizance of. Because look, the war is not just on the ground, it's also in the information space. It's also through the cyber world or through tech, etc. So I hope we are taking cognizance of that and doing things to not just counter that, but to defend ourselves in the near future. I am sure something must be done, but not everything comes out in the open source domain immediately.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi in his third term. In his first term, we saw that his focus was strengthening ties with the West. In his second term, he was strengthening ties in Central Asia. What do you think his focus should be in the third term?
I think it will be a continued focus because we can't let go of the benefits that we've had in the last 2 terms, right? So, which is why, as you said, our ties, trade ties, defense cooperation ties, etc., with the West have grown in the past, and they're going to continue to grow, be it Kamala Harris or Trump. That is going to happen because the US also needs India right now. So that's going to continue, and we can't just leave it there. With Central Asia, again, the whole energy component. Because we are a 1.4 billion, populated, our population is 1.4 billion, and we need to grow. We will definitely need energy. So we can't have a lackadaisical sort of approach towards Central Asia as well. We've been stepping up our ties with Taiwan. In fact, in the last 2 terms, before Lai Ching-te, they had President Tsai Ing-wen, same party, DPP, but our ties tremendously grown. There are huge similarities which both India and Taiwan can leverage. So which is why along with Tata's, you will see TSMC setting up base in Dholera, Gujarat, and so on. So I think this momentum should not be slipped. In fact, when President Lai Ching-te, he congratulated Prime Minister Modi on Twitter. There was a long enough reply from Prime Minister Modi, which talked about, enhancing our ties through technology, etc. This is a huge departure from the past. So I think now we are also going to continue focusing on Taiwan, build it up. Also, we are focusing more towards Southeast Asia. We just sold the first batch of BrahMos missiles to Philippines. Well, we are having some sorts of talks, etc., at the track 2 level, track 1.5 level with countries in Southeast Asia because, well, that region matters for us also. A huge amount of our trade flows through that. So I think we will also leverage our ties, continue leveraging our ties with Southeast Asia. And we will also focus towards the very often ignored continent of Africa. During the G20, we got this huge actor, huge player, this union of 50 plus countries into the G20. So which means we are also looking there. So these things are going to continue. India calls itself Vishwamitra or the world's friend. So I think we are going to continue investing in relationships across the globe without falling into anyone's wars. The relationship US might have with Iran, so be it. It's those 2 countries' choices. We will assess our relationships with Iran based on our choices, our realities. Bangladesh might not have a very great relationship again with the US. That being said, that is those 2 countries' choices. We will still have a relationship based with the US on the merits of India-Bangladesh relationship, or even with the US based on the merits of India-US relationship. We are Vishwamitra. Friends don't poke, So that's why we use the term. So, and I think we're going to continue to showcase that we are the Vishwamitra. I think yesterday only we invested immensely in UNESCO or preservation of cultural heritage across countries of the global south. Because, well, we want the cultures or indigenous cultures of countries outside the Anglo-Saxon sphere to be preserved. So we're going to continue doing that, showcasing that, yes, We want to be a friend with everyone. Now, if other countries want to make enemies out of us, that's not really something we can help.
Donald Trump to come in power, the Republicans to come into power, what does the dynamic change in the South China Sea? Because we were talking about again, like you were talking about how he was he was saying that Taiwan must pay them to be feel secure. What is that kind of thought process?
So Taiwan is, I'm very sure there's a lot of mulling over happening in Taiwan right now if Donald Trump does come to power, because it doesn't work well for them at all. He's very specifically, clearly said, I'm not going to interfere in cross-straits crisis. Of course, for his own country, he's going to shield against the Chinese. So there'll be more economic escalations against China, etc. But would he shield Taiwan from them? He's clearly stated it. I don't want to interfere, because he wants to be more inward looking, making his own economy and polity stronger. So that's going to be a big source of concern for Taiwan, which is why it's also trying to reach out to other countries, including India, and preparing for a possible, if not a full-blown conflict, for a possible escalation of conflict. What would happen vis-a-vis Philippines? Again, I think that's another arena we need to watch out for, because again, Philippines has been engaging in this huge David and Goliath sort of story, in which small little David is pushing back against this monster Goliath, and it's got the tacit support of the US. Would that change under Trump? He's not said anything specifically about Philippines, but he could. Look, as opposed to Biden or say someone from the Democrats, Trump has largely been very erratic. There's no continuity in his policies. It's difficult to predict. He's very difficult to predict. So he might do something which is a knee-jerk reaction, and then he might just backtrack on it, right? So which is why even China and Russia supposedly preferred Biden over Trump. Putin had even said he prefers Biden over Trump. The world's conflict scenarios are going to get a little bit more complicated if Donald Trump were to come to power. But then yes, if that's the reality one has to live with, that would be the reality.
Ma'am, why is Taiwan of such importance? Because we keep talking about a conflict looming there and the importance of Taiwan. But for me to understand better, can you tell me a little why is Taiwan so important?
First and foremost, trade. Because it has been able to create, chips which go into really highly sophisticated things. They'll go into nuclear reactors, and they'll go into all sorts of machinery, etc. And those are things which are produced only in Taiwan, largely produced only in Taiwan. The world doesn't have that capacity yet. So if China can take over that, it also takes over the capacity to produce that. And that will not work very well for the US. Because China would, of course, not sell it to the US anymore. And if ever there's, in some theater of the world, if there's some sort of conflict, China will have an upper hand over the US. So that is primarily of concern. Look, this whole concept of democracy as practiced by the West, I have reservations about that. But then yes, US also says Taiwan is a fellow democracy. So, and look, every country, whichever wants to be the leader of the international system, it also has to make sure that its own governance system is accepted by the others, or the large majority of others, which is why the US keeps talking about democracy. So it says that, one more country, Taiwan, will fall, a democracy, and such a vibrant democracy would fall to China and its autocratic system, and so on. So, even in terms of ideology, there's that concern. In terms of trade, a huge amount of world trade passes through that region. If China can capture that, it works really well for them. So the world really won't want that. And the US definitely won't want that. India also won't want that. A lot of our trade also comes through that region. And now that, a lot of Taiwanese companies are investing in India, and we are hoping to leverage them for pushing our Make in India program. If it falls to China, then it doesn't really happen anymore. So that's why Taiwan is such a, crucial actor. It's really small, etc. But A, it sits in a very important geographic location. B, it's built its economic and technological prowess. So that's why it's so important.
So what are the dynamics in South China Sea currently? Because I was reading about some artificial islands created by China for their military bases, for instance.
So the situation in South China Sea is very, very difficult, because it's not just China which, has sovereignty claims in the South China Sea. The sovereignty claims of, say, the other actors also overlap. So Taiwan's claims overlap with Philippines, Philippines' claims would overlap with Vietnam's, and so on. So it's a huge quagmire. If the ASEAN countries, could resolve the dispute amongst themselves and be united against China in its claims in the South China Sea, it would be best. But it's not just one claimant. Every country is claiming, some aspect or the other of the South China Sea. There was the Hague Tribunal ruling, which ruled in favor of the Philippines. Philippines had taken this case to the Hague Tribunal and said that, look, China is, building artificial islands, etc., and is claiming a lot of things. So the Hague Tribunal ruled in Philippines' favor. So China just questioned the rationale behind the existence of the Hague Tribunal and said that it shouldn't even exist and so on. This is a very typical behavior from China. It's either my way or the highway. That's China's way. That ruling has been passed, but nothing concrete has been come out of it, because China keeps building its ADIZs or artificial islands and so on in the disputed islands. What can Philippines do? It's holding its ground. In the past, Vietnam also tried holding its ground, but there are several countries in the South China Sea which are heavily dependent on China for a lot of things. Cambodia, Laos, these are just a few examples. It's a huge mess, the whole South China Sea. Again, trade or underground, underwater sea reserves, mineral resources, these are of very high importance. And that's why South China Sea is also an important region, which is why China will keep flexing its muscles over there. See, I'll just to give you an example. Say tomorrow you say this whole mat is yours, right? And then I claim it, right? What I do is that I slowly start building islands here, right? And I say that the territory beyond this has to be exclusive economic zone, belongs to me. So the moment I can create territory, certain miles beyond my territory become mine. Very good way to advance one's sovereign, so-called sovereign claim. So that's what China is doing.
Interesting. Ma'am, geopolitics is an interesting subject at the moment because there's so much happening. But since we spoke about the war in Russia-Ukraine, we spoke about the potential war in Taiwan. I want to hear your perspective on the current Israel-Palestine issue as well.
It's a very difficult, again, a very difficult situation. All wars are very difficult and all wars are very bad, of course. But that being said, again, this whole, war in West Asia between Israel and Gaza, again, has put countries in a difficult situation. Who should a country really support? Of course, no country would support the bombardment or carpet bombardment of children, as is happening to Palestinian children. But then again, any country with the correct human morals also would not support, the dehumanization of dead bodies of Israelis who were just at a party, No sane country can also support the usage of rape as a tool for furthering conflict, right? So it's a very difficult situation. This also has become a protracted conflict because the hostages have not yet returned. There have been multiple calls to Hamas. One of the easiest ways to end this current conflict would have been to return the hostages. But Hamas has not really done that. And there are a lot of other sorts of things also which, unfortunately, Hamas as a group has done, which has ensured that Palestinians themselves suffer. That being said, yes, there should be a two-state solution. Israel and Palestine both have a right to exist. The ways in which this has unfolded, and we see a lot of anti-Semitism against Israel across the globe, that is also really uncalled for. The rapes and killings of Jews across the world, that is uncalled for. These are common people, maybe not even citizens of Israel anymore. They are in third countries. It's just that they practice a certain faith. That is also extremely wrong. And the whole conflict has become really awry. It's gone really wrong. I think yesterday also the ICJ had said that, the occupation of Israel of the territories is wrong. It's correct what it has said. But what it should also have probably condemned is the mass terrorist activities which took place on October 7th and the need for the return of the hostages. Because till the hostages do not return, the country to which the hostages belong, that will keep searching for the hostages. It cannot stop. That's expected of any sane government. Heavens forbid if ever that happened to our country, we would also probably expect our government to do the same. So it's a bad situation. And again, there are third countries which are reaping benefits out of it. China has been supplying a lot of tacit weapons to Hamas. China has been pushing out all sorts of anti-Semitic narratives about Jews, etc. So it's again become a really bad mess. Will it get resolved anytime soon? The hope is that it does. The hope is that the hostages return home. The hope is that this war can end. But yeah, would it really end is a question. It would have ended by now, had the hostages been released. So difficult situation again.
All these conflicts around the world is a major problem for us, but the common factor is the presence of United States in all of them, and the change in leadership from elections in November will obviously change the dynamics a lot. Having said that, to lighten this conversation, ma'am, where do you get your information from on geopolitics? There's so much knowledge that you have to throw to us. Where do you get it from?
No, it's just, I think it's a professional hazard. So if you have to teach, you also have to constantly learn, right? Because my wonderful students have so many brilliant questions, I have to be prepared with the answers. So, well, newspapers, traditional media, of course, newspapers and books and journals, etc. But also new media, Instagram Reels, or websites, online websites, news aggregators, and so on.
Are traditional media a trustworthy source in today's time, ma'am?
I think some of the more renowned ones, some of the more renowned newspapers, like the Hindu. I'm not promoting any one particular one, but the ones which I read would be the Hindu, the Indian Express, Hindustan Times. So I think those are still very credible.
But I think the best shaping of perspectives for you in international studies would be the meeting of people that you connect with a lot of people in the international stage, in terms of different seminars, conferences that you go to. Is that an important, source of information and, news for you as well?
It is, of course, because, when you meet other people and hear their perspectives and as to how they see the world, it shapes you. I'll just give you a very quick example. I had met the Taiwanese side a few days ago, and, there's this constant saying or this constant requirement, especially from Taiwan or pro-Taiwan people, that, why does India follow the one China policy? It should recognize Taiwan, etc. And, the hope is that in case there's a conflict from China against Taiwan, India would do something. Now, my views, of course, are that, while we are holding the Chinese People's Liberation Army down, how could we ever go to another country's rescue? It's not logically possible. And then one China policy, well, the most powerful state of the system, US, also follows one China policy. So expecting that from India is a bit too much. So I asked a question and I said that, there's so much of expectation, but what did Taiwan do when China attacked India at Galwan in 2020? Countries across the globe made some sort of a statement. Most of the statements, including from EU and Russia, whether India and China should resolve it peacefully. It was only the US and Japan which condemned China. Was there any sort of condemnation or any statement about this whole conflict from Taiwan? Was there even a statement? There was none, right? So my question was, what has Taiwan done for us, right? I got a new piece of information, and I'm yet to test this, but I think it is credible, is that Taiwan offered to sell certain artillery to India during the whole India-China Galwan crisis, and India refused. If the source of information is true, of course, India would refuse because we have our own weaponry. Yes, one can argue it's outdated from Russia and so on. We have our own weaponry as well. More importantly, China claims Taiwan, and we know there are extensive linkages between Taiwan and China. When we are in a conflict with China, how do we get weapons from another region or another country which China claims as its own? We have to be wary, right? Logically, it's that. But this is something I did not know earlier, that they had tried to, or at least offered selling us some sort of weaponry. If they did, well, that's also some sort of a gesture. But yes, a statement should have been made from Taiwan side. So it gives you new information, it gives you new perspectives, it gives you new understanding. So that also immensely helps.
If there's any piece of advice you want to give to someone who is in the similar lines as you in terms of research and academics, what would that be? Because, it's a dynamic subject, geopolitics. To understand it rightly and not be ignorant about, because it's like a perception that you hold. You can't be always right or have a concrete mindset. What is one piece of advice you would give to them?
First, read, of course. That goes without saying. But besides reading, whatever you read, also find out if it's factually correct or not. Because the age that we are living in, it's very easy to get fed with wrong information or wrong facts. Another important thing is keep facts and figures at your fingertips. Remember those. Because if you have that, then you can build your whole theory or your perspective around it, right? Try and be objective, read from both the sides so that you can, but have your own opinion. Going with any one particular side and, getting swayed, that is also not something which will give you too much of credibility. You need to understand what exactly is it that you're aiming at and how do you get in perspectives and chart your way forward. Try and always get in some facts, some data, something which is not there in the existing body of literature, and present it so that your work is pioneering, your work is innovative, something which no one has done before. Think of a perspective which has to be factually correct and put it out forward. So read, test the wisdom, test the knowledge indices which you're getting, and have your clear-cut own view. If you don't have your own view, people do not respect you.
Definitely. Yeah, that's an important part. Excellent, ma'am. Ma'am, while sitting with you, while having conversation, it just occurred to me, why not have a new system in this podcast that I'm trying to do with different experts on geopolitics and international affairs? Is there any question you want to leave for the next guest to answer for you on the map of geopolitics, on the subject of geopolitics? Any particular question you want to leave for the next guest so that I'll pose that the first question I'll ask him would be posed on the question that you leave.
Okay, interesting. Where do you see India 10 years from now? Not 20. I'm not going up to 2047. Where do you see India 10 years from now?
Interesting. I will make sure to start my conversation with this question. And this conversation, as always with you, has been an insightful one and very interesting because our last conversation was focused on Indo-China relations. But today's conversation was, if we see the globe here, it was everywhere. We were going from the US to China to Russia to the Middle East as well. And a very well covered conversation. So much to learn from you. Thank you so much again for your time, ma'am. I'm sure the audience got a lot of it as well. If you enjoyed the episode or got some value out of it, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Until then, keep reimagining yourself and know that the power of change lies within you.